Welcome to Human Monsters Premium. In the 80s, the comedy movie Parenthood stuck in my mind. One of the actors playing a lost teenager tells his girlfriend's mother about the abuse he suffered at home and ends his tale with the statement that you need a license to catch a fish, to drive a car, to own a television, and even to own a dog, but any asshole can be a father. It takes a considerable amount of unselfish work, love, and sacrifice to raise a happy, healthy, and well-adjusted child, and I consider it the hardest job in the world. Unfortunately for many babies, the stork dropped them down the chimney of a house that is full of neglect, abuse, and hardship. Examples of extreme abuse and depravity are plentiful enough to warrant concern, but these children become adults, and without therapy and guidance, what happens with the sadness, the rage, and the confusion inevitably generated by sexual and physical abuse and neglect? When I first watched the YouTube clip about Beth Thomas, even a hardened true crime consumer like myself found a chilly ice finger run down my spine as the 6-year-old little girl spoke. Looking at her with the sound turned off, you see a big-eyed little girl with a rosy blush on her cheek, and you can almost imagine smelling bubble gum on her breath and sunshine and strawberries in her hair. But when she opens her mouth and, with an almost disinterested tone, recounts her deeds, any listener's soul would want to instinctively take a step back. With a shy smile, she tells the psychiatrist in an almost bored manner how she sticks pins into her brother and her animals. She openly admits sneaking up to his room to punch him in his stomach while he is sleeping. Killing little birds came as natural to her as opening a can of soda. Without any emotions, she admits that she wanted to kill her adopted parents and her brother. In a sweet voice, she confesses that she has uncontrollable urges to masturbate, and that killing comes naturally to her. Her parents were forced to lock her in her room to keep anyone in the household safe from her. If you look for the video online, you will probably find it under the link Evil Little Girl or Psycho Little Girl. But she was not born that way. A minister and his wife adopted the little girl and her brother when she was 19 months old and her brother 7 months old. Ben's mother died from kidney failure a month before her adoption. The condition in which the children were found was deplorable. John had been picked up so little that his head had flattened at the back. Social workers discovered him in his crib covered in feces and urine, with a curdled bottle of milk at the foot of his cot. He had been picked up so few times that he struggled to lift his head. Beth's condition was not much better, and it would later be established that her father had sexually abused her. The couple wanted to share their love and leave a legacy behind, but they were completely unprepared for the emotionless 6-year-old, who frequently hid knives and would bash her brother's head against the concrete until someone stopped her. The couple had the foresight to get her help, but the question remained if the abuse she received at such a young age had caused irreparable damage to her psyche. After going through all the research for the case of David Maust, I had to wonder if intervention had occurred early enough in his life. Would things have turned around, and would 5 boys never have lost their lives? Many a fragile mind had been fractured at infancy by parents who showed little or no love for their children. This was the case with David Edward Maust. He was born on the 5th of April, 1954 in Connellsville, Pennsylvania, and despite his surname having a distinct Amish ring to it, the family was anything but faithful. Parents Eva and George themselves had tragic childhoods. George was orphaned when he was 12 years old, and in some of the foster homes he was placed in, he was sexually and physically abused. Eva grew up on a farm, and her childhood is described as depraved and miserable. Her mother treated her like a slave, and her father beat her with boards and chains. While in Pennsylvania, Eva would be institutionalized in a psychiatric hospital and would be diagnosed as being psychotic. David was the second out of 4 siblings, and it has been speculated that forceps being used during his birth might have caused some of his later disturbing behavior. Eva claimed that David had thrown objects at his baby brother at the age of 2 and later tried to set his crib on fire. Jeremy, David's brother, later claimed in his book that David had been sexually abused by a family member and hinted that Eva might have been abusing her son. Her relationship with her son was odd enough that it could be believable. She hated David, and it is speculated that the reason for her despising her son was that he looked exactly like his father. In 1961, the Maust family moved to Chicago, Illinois, and shortly after this relocation, George decided to leave his wife and family. Whatever coals of loathing had been smoldering in Eva's heart towards her son had suddenly been stoked into raging flames. He was repeatedly told she did not want him. After their divorce, Eva sent David to live with his father, but that arrangement lasted no more than a day, before David was posted back to his mother. In 1963, when David was 9 years old, his mother had him institutionalized. She claimed the crib burning incident and the fact that he, as a toddler, threw things at his brother were the reasons she successfully had him placed in the Dunnings State Hospital in Chicago. She added that he once killed a squirrel with a baseball bat, and that he had also tried to drown his brother. His brother Jeffrey told her both the latter stories. She said she could not control him anymore. Stories about abuse and neglect in this facility were rife, and the hospital had a reputation for having parents just dropping off their children when they did not want to take care of them. One boy staff later recounted only stayed with him during the summer months when his parents went on holiday. Eva was encouraged to visit and strengthen her bond with her child, but she was not interested. She would arrange visits and, without excuse, just not show up. David would stand for hours in front of the hospital windows, waiting for his mother, and when she failed to show up, he would make excuses for her, such as she must be sick or her back hurts. Hospital staff reported that they never saw the lying, stealing, and out-of-control behavior his mother claimed he had, and they soon realized she had just dumped him there. He was, however, definitely affected by the lack of parental interaction and was preoccupied with a fear of abandonment. He had not one bad report, but despite all their efforts, Eva would not allow David home for visits and eventually bluntly said that she just did not want him home. When staff tried to encourage her to take David with her on a swimming trip, she refused, adding that she wished he would drown. Eva would during this time be described by a social worker as needy, psychotic, disturbed, and narcissistic. In 1967, David was sent to the children's home when he was 13, which opened him up to more psychological damage. Within days of his arrival, a boy who made sexual advances on him approached him. David rebuffed his advances, but the boy blackmailed him by threatening to tell everyone that he was in a mental institution, and David was forced to kiss the boy. This event left him feeling deeply ashamed. It was during his time at the children's home that David confessed he choked 2 of the other boys in the home. Both boys survived, but it was clear that the rage and David's own hatred had caught fire. The boy whose mother did not want him was left angry and confused by his own actions. He was sent back to the state hospital in 1970, but soon after his return he ran away, never to return. Eva still wanted nothing to do with her son, and she sent him to work for his uncle in Ritzville, Georgia. His uncle owned a construction company, and David was reportedly very good at his job, but he was fired after crashing a company truck. In 1971, he tried to return to his family home, but Eva was so determined to not have anything to do with her son that she threatened him to get out of her house with a knife. She later apologized, and realizing David had no other options, she took him to an army recruiter. At the age of 18 years old, David was enlisted in the army. David started basic training in St. Louis and would eventually be a cook in Frankfurt, Germany, where he picked up the hobby of bowling. He was excellent at his recreation and even won trophies and prizes. By all accounts, he was an able serviceman with no issues. While stationed in Frankfurt in 1974, David met a boy named Jimmy McCluster at a bowling alley. Jimmy's parents were also stationed in Germany, and by now David had begun befriending teenagers instead of people his own age. The two had struck up a friendship, but this would not last. From what we can gather, Jimmy started to threaten David that he would tell everyone they knew that David was gay and that Jimmy caught him masturbating. David also told of a time he woke up naked with Jimmy on top of him, also naked, and claims that he did not recall anything before that. Once again, David was filled with first shame and then rage. A month after the incident, David and Jimmy stole a couple of mopeds and drove around in the forest. Somewhere during this scenic trip, David forced Jimmy deep into the forest on foot by threatening him with a knife. He tied the boy to a tree and beat him with his fists and a board from which nails protruded. After the assault, David untied the dying boy and would later tell psychiatrists that Jimmy died after he had taken 10 feet of steps deeper into the woods. He also claimed that he had decided 7 months before that he was going to kill Jimmy. David was quickly arrested and charged with larceny and manslaughter. According to his lawyer, David claimed that Jimmy had died in an accident he had with a stolen moped he was driving, and despite the physical evidence pointing at nothing less than first-degree murder, David was sentenced to only 4 years in prison, which he did in Fort Leavenworth Prison. After serving 3 years, David was paroled, despite his numerous pleas to let him stay incarcerated. In his diary, he would say that he was scared to go back to the real world, and when he was behind bars, he could not hurt anyone. The powers, however, disagreed with David, and he was set free on the 10th of May, 1977. He went back to Chicago and took up employment as a machinist. 8 months into his employment, he stabbed a fellow employee by almost gutting him with a 6-inch knife. The victim survived, and David would stand trial for this attack in 1980. What baffled everyone was the absolute lack of motive, and unfortunately, not much further is known about the attack. In August 1981, the urge to kill again overtook David. He set out to kill the boy who had sexually assaulted him in the children's home. But after finding out the boy, who was now a man, was in prison, he decided to look for another victim. David spotted 15-year-old Donald Jones walking down the street and decided he would be the perfect scapegoat for all the transgressions life had dealt him. He turned on his charm and lured Donald into his car. He drove Donald to a quarry, and as his victim stuttered and begged clemency for whatever transgression had caused this attack, David first stabbed the boy and then proceeded to drown him. After killing Donald, David fled Texas. In December 1981, David came across Richard Sweet and Stephen Anderson as the two were walking home after a trip to the 7-Eleven in Galveston. He stopped next to the two boys in his two-tone Chevy Blazer and asked the teenagers if they were interested in making some money. Being broke teenagers, both were interested, but Richard felt a hint of hesitation when David said he only needed one of them to help him. Stephen, however, got into the car and told David he needed to call his mother. David offered to take him to his hotel room where he could call her. Once Stephen entered the hotel room, David punched him in the back of his head. He threw Stephen on the bed and, while repeatedly punching him, told him that if he screamed, he would kill him. Stephen blacked out from the attack and said the last thing he remembered was that David was removing his pants. After the attack, David drove Stephen to a park and tried to give him money to keep quiet, but Stephen's injuries were so severe that he would be hospitalized for a week, and the police were notified. His arms showed clear marks of being bound, and apart from the numerous bruises, he had also been stabbed. Stephen asked his mother if he was raped, and she said the examination showed no, but Stephen believed his mother was lying to him to protect him. David would be found guilty of kidnapping and assault and would be sentenced to 5 years in prison. He felt an incredible sense of remorse for the crime, going as far as to try to commit suicide several times and slashing his face in repentance. In 1983, David was extradited from Texas to Illinois, where he would stand trial for the murder of Donald Jones. He openly confessed to the murder in front of the Cook County Sheriff's officers, but refused to sign a statement. One of the investigators wrote on one of the pages in his file, "Bad guy, Gacy type." He was initially found not fit to stand trial and underwent many interviews with mental health care experts. They confirmed what any true crime addict already knows, which is that David's childhood had a direct link to his crimes. For the next 10 years, David would spend his time in the Cook County prison system, as doctors and psychiatrists could not agree on whether David was fit enough to stand trial. He would frequently write in his diary that prison was the best place for him to be, and that he did not want to be released. After the 10 years of back and forth to court, David pled guilty to the murder of Donald Jones, and he was sentenced to 35 years in prison. He received 12 years off for time served and for good behavior. He would effectively only serve 7 years in prison before he was released. His release came after the Cook County Sheriff's Office sent a fax to the prison stating that David is most likely the most dangerous prisoner they have ever housed, despite his impeccable record during incarceration. Once again, David pleaded with the Illinois Parole Board not to release him, and instead send him to the Sheridan State Institution to spend the rest of his life. The letter went unanswered. He was released on the 25th of June, 1999, with no place to go. David would spend almost a year living in homeless shelters and essentially being homeless before he moved to the suburb of Oakland. There he made friends with a man named Anthony Mazur. He sold Anthony pipe dreams of starting a weed growing operation, claiming to have land and money to fund the project. After a while, Anthony realized that nothing was going to become of the plans, but when he told David he was going to go to Wisconsin to start a life there, David started beating him with a pipe. The attack only ended when Anthony shouted for him to stop, and David appeared instantly apologetic. The injuries Anthony sustained caused him to receive 28 stitches and 48 staples. Originally, Anthony did not want to press charges, but by the time he decided he did, too much time had passed to make a good enough case. In June 2002, David moved into a house in Hammond, owned by Bill Hanton. The home was split into several apartments, and although the accommodation was less than stellar, David at least had a roof over his head. Bill owned a trophy shop called Trophies R Us in Fulton, Illinois, and he offered David employment which he gladly accepted. It would be at the trophy shop where David would meet 19-year-old Nick James, who was also an employee. Nick and his best friend would spend a lot of time at David's house because David would let them drink, smoke weed, and give the teenagers cash when they came around. The boys thought David was just a good guy because he never asked for anything in return. David's home seemed to be a place where teenagers could congregate and do whatever they wanted. That was until the first teenager went missing. May 2003. Nick's girlfriend reported him missing. September 10th. Lynn Smith, mother of James Bagnall, reported her son missing. It would turn out that 16-year-old James's best friend was also missing, as Haley Gilkinson reported that her son, Michael Dennis, who was 13 years old, was also missing. The mothers found different notes around the house, indicating that their disappearances had been a planned event. The notes would say things like that the boys were tired of things at home and were moving to California or Washington, and one said that they would return once they were 18 years old. Police took these reports seriously and began to interview the missing teenagers' friends, who told them that all three boys had been spending a lot of time with a much older guy they all called Crazy Dave. Hallie told police that she was aware of the friendship and that David had given her son not only shoes, but stereo equipment as a gift. Michael had met David at a communal pool, and investigators knew that the friendship between an older middle-aged man with a record and teenagers that went missing needed to be more closely investigated. When officers visited the home where David lived on the 18th of September, they found the almost 50-year-old man in the backyard, smoking and drinking a beer as he relaxed. David answered all their questions in a calm and friendly manner, but one officer would later say that despite his congenial demeanor, something about David felt off. They searched his second-floor apartment and found no signs of a crime having been committed or foul play, and left the house unsatisfied. Something just did not sit right with the officers in regards to David and his interaction with teenagers. They decided to charge him with contributing to the delinquency of a minor on the 2nd of October. Once back at the police station, officers realized that the house had communal areas, which they had never searched. They returned to the house and went to the basement to look for any sign of the three missing boys. At first glance, the basement looked like any other basement with an elevated platform, for what officers presumed was to put the washer and dryer upon. It suddenly struck them that the platform could not possibly be for the washer and dryer because the power outlet was on the opposite side of the wall. It was then that the help of the canine unit was called in. Officer Dale Bach brought in his giant schnauzer named Amo. Amo was a trained cadaver dog from the Hammond police station, trained to find bodies. Officers explained to the handler that they had 3 boys missing and that they had a suspect, but no probable cause, and they needed to find out what happened to those boys. Amo was taken down to the basement and given command to search. Amo was taken down to the basement and given command to search. But instead of giving an aggressive command by scratching, Amo had moved to the left corner of the room and started to bark. The officer reeled him in and let him go on his command. Once again, the dog went to the same corner and barked again. Although the dog had not given the trained response, the officer advised his fellow lawmen that they should not be prudent and re-examine the spot Amo indicated. About a week later, the officer and Amo were asked to return to the basement to further search for the missing boys. During the previous week, officers had been drilling into the raised platform, which stood about 10 inches high. But despite going as far as they could, none of them were any the wiser as to if the platform was just an awkward, misplaced piece of the architecture or if it was the makeshift grave of the missing three. Holes were drilled in several places of the platform, and the holes were all between 4 and 6 inches deep. When the officer gave the command to search, Amo immediately went to the southwest corner, where one of the holes were, and started to scratch aggressively. After pulling his dog back, a cameraman, who happened to be present at the house, asked the officer if they could repeat the action, because he did not get it on film. This time, instead of going to the same hole, Amo moved to another hole along the west side of the wall and started to once more aggressively scratch. This was enough proof that the concrete had to be broken up to see what lies beneath the gray slab. It appeared that David had used a tremendous amount of cement to build his tomb, but the timeless sign of coffin flies and the spider webs in the basement gave away the grim reality that this was the place the boys lost their lives. 2 bodies were found, wrapped in plastic. A third body was discovered, but unlike the others, it appeared that it had been repeatedly covered with lead-based blue paint. It would later transpire that David had placed the body, which would later be identified as that belonging to James, in a bathtub and then proceeded to pour paint over it to hide the smell. The body, covered in 1/2 inch of paint, was wrapped in plastic. All 3 boys had objects inserted into their rectums, including a coat hanger. A fact that immediately piqued my interest was the discovery of a map with crosses, and just like me, officers wondered if those markings might indicate more bodies that may have been buried by the suspect, David Maust. But so far, all leads have led to a dead end. It is maps like these that I, along with co-host Bonnie Lee, will be taking a closer look at when we delve deeper into our podcast, Children of the Void, which already has a couple of episodes for your listening pleasure. This exciting and proactive project will focus on missing children in the USA and Canada, but more about that later. The trial for the murdered children's parents was a harrowing affair. David told the court that he killed James with a baseball bat, but regretted it immediately because of the mess it made. That is why he decided to strangle his other 2 victims. All evidence indicated premeditation, and yet the motive was never really clear. David was sentenced to 3 life sentences, but he would spend only a couple of months in prison before he killed himself. David made an entry in his diary on the 30th of October 2005 that is worth repeating. He wrote, "When I got locked up in the Army, and especially when I got locked up in 1981, I knew I should never be let out again. I didn't know how to act around other people, and I was never taught how to make friends and keep them. When an inmate says he does not want to go out, I hope somebody listens." Early on the morning of the 20th of January 2006, David manufactured a rope by tearing his bed sheets and knotting the ribbons together. Correctional officers found him at sunrise, clinging to life, and rushed him to the state hospital, where he survived for 27 hours before he finally passed away. His brother Jeffrey wasted no time writing biographies. Both, despite several inconsistencies in their accounts of David's life, would go so far as to peddle their goods on talk shows like Montel Williams. It is a pity they did not care this much about him when he was alive. I started off this episode by telling you about Beth Thomas and the struggles she and her family faced after prolonged abuse at the hands of her parents. Anyone who saw the clip, which we will include, will agree that it did not seem that there was much hope for her, And even though the loving couple probably gave her back to the Department of Social Services, but Beth had no ordinary parents. Despite her frightening conduct, they loved the little girl dearly, and as people of faith, they believed where there is hope, there is life. After doing a little digging, I found Beth Thomas and discovered a beautiful middle-aged woman with a family of her own. Her childhood abuse might have left her with psychopathy, but her parents had the kind of compassion, love, and tenderness that they believed could heal her with help. In 1989, Beth was moved to a treatment center for children with attachment disorder. With strict rules, intense therapy, and love, Beth was saved from a lifetime of rage and unacceptable behavior. She was diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder, and one of the most challenging aspects of their treatment was to teach her that she was valuable and loved. Beth improved and started to show signs of affection. With time, she developed a conscience, and as time passed, she developed into a wonderful young woman. For a long time, no one heard about the child of rage. But in 2010, the book Dandelion on My Pillow, Butcher Knives Underneath was published by Beth Thomas about attachment disorder and its effects on children. She once again reappeared in 2015 on BBS Radio at the age of 32. She revealed in the interview that she and John were the youngest of 6 children in their abusive household. She briefly explains the causes for reactive attachment disorder and her road to recovery. It has been a long, painful, and rocky road, but now Beth teaches others about attachment disorder and how to heal. She became a nurse who works in the neonatal unit of a hospital, and she teaches other young mothers to connect and bond with their babies. She believes where there is hope, there is life, and that it's important to recognize that there is a problem, and that complete commitment from all involved is vital to healing. The following is the documentary Child of Rage, which features a disturbing interview with the 6-year-old Beth Thomas.
Are people afraid of you, Beth?
Uh-huh.
Who's afraid of you, Beth?
John.
Your brother. And what is your brother? Why is your brother afraid of you?
Because I hurt him so much.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what, at nighttime, what do your parents do to your door?
Lock it shut.
Why do they lock it shut?
Because they don't want me to hurt John.
Right. And they're kind of afraid of hurting John? Of you hurting John?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Are they afraid that you might hurt them?
Yep.
Would you, Beth?
Mm-hmm.
When would you do it?
Nighttime.
Okay. Why would you do nighttime?
Because I don't like them seeing me do it. But they can feel me do it.
Mm-hmm. And what would you do to him, Beth?
Stab them.
Okay. What would you stab him with?
A knife.
Do you ever stick pins in people?
Mm-hmm.
Who?
My brother.
Okay. Do you do it a little bit or a lot?
A lot.
Okay. And what are you trying to do to your brother?
Kill him.
Why do you want your brother to die?
Because I was hurt so bad, and I don't want to be around people.
Okay. Who else would you like to stick pins into?
Mommy and Daddy.
What would you like to have happen to them?
Die.
Jesus couldn't have lived to save Israel, yet he chose to die to save the world.
Tim is the minister of a small Methodist church in the South. He and his wife Julie have been married for 12 years.
Jesus didn't say
Unable to have children of their own, they decided to adopt. In February of 1984, they received a call from the Department of Social Services telling them they had 2 children available for adoption. They were told that Beth 19 months old, and her brother Jonathan, 7 months old, were normal and healthy.
We did not need children to make our lives complete. We felt secure in ourselves and secure in our relationship, but we wanted to share that with somebody else, and we felt like we had a lot to pass on to a child, and that was what we really wanted to do. And when the phone call came, it was like, at last it's here.
It seemed like a miracle. It had happened so quick. We'd heard of couples having to wait 5, 10 years on a child, and here we had 2 young children. It was like the answer to our dream.
Their dream became a nightmare when they realized that Beth and Jonathan had severe emotional problems.
We had the kids with us, Beth and her younger brother John, for probably a couple of months until we began to learn something about their background and their past. And when we learned it, some things seemed to fall in place about her behavior and John's behavior. From several sources, we discovered that they didn't have enough food to eat. That perhaps even Beth went all day maybe with just a box of Kick cereal. John himself was found in a bassinet with little patches of urine all over it and a dirty diaper and a couple of bottles at his feet that had curdled milk, and the back of his head was completely flat. The front of his head had bulged out, and at 7 months he couldn't raise his head, couldn't roll over. He was just had no stimulation, and we think perhaps that had happened to Beth, and it wasn't very long until she began showing some signs of perhaps even some abuse. There was a nightmare that she had, and the nightmare was about a man who was falling on her and hurting her with a part of himself.
Tell me about your birth father. What was that nightmare like?
When he touched my vaginas
Okay.
until it bled, hurt it a lot until it bled, and wouldn't feed me a lot. He'd hit on me, wouldn't be very nice to me.
How old were you?
1.
And in your nightmare, what happens?
I get real scared.
Where are you in the nightmare? What happens in the dream?
I'm in the house, upstairs.
And then what happens, Beth?
When he comes upstairs and, hurts.
How do you feel when you talk about this?
Scared.
Where's your birth father? What's he doing?
He's right there, and there's his hand. His hand's right there.
Where?
Right there. You can't hardly see it because it's green.
What's it touching?
My vaginas.
And what is your birth father doing?
Hurting it.
Your face looks sad. Can you tell me about that?
It's crying because there's dots of the tears.
Beth had endured severe neglect and abuse as a child. Her birth mother died when she was 1. Because of these early childhood experiences, Beth never developed a sense of conscience, love, or trust for anyone. The early sexual abuse by her birth father would cause her to exhibit inappropriate sexual behavior, especially toward her brother.
Does your brother have private parts?
Yeah.
Yeah. What is his private parts?
Penis and butt.
And what do you do with your brother, with his private parts, Beth?
I heard it.
Tell me about it. What do you do?
Well, I pinch it, squeeze it, kick it.
When you do things to your brother's private parts, what does he say?
Stop.
Okay, tell me that.
Well, he says stop, but I don't stop.
you hurt him?
A lot.
Okay. And would you like to do that to other boys?
When I caught her with Jonathan one morning, she was molesting him. He was crying and his pants were down, and I said, Beth, what's happening? And she said, I pulled his penis and put my finger up his anus. And I said, didn't he say to stop? And she said, yeah, he did. And I said, did you? And she said, no.
Have you ever rubbed your private parts?
Do
Do you do it a lot?
A lot.
How much do you do that?
Not every single day in Lexington. I did it every single day until it got real bad and messed up, and I had to go to the doctor, and I did not like it.
What do you mean by real bad?
Well, it looked real raw, got all kinds of boo-boos on it, germs, a lot of stuff from my hand.
And it bled?
She started to masturbate at inappropriate times. I remember one time, specifically, when we were at the hospital waiting for Tim to come out. He was there visiting. And Beth and John were in the back seat, and I turned around, and she had her legs spread and was masturbating in a public parking lot. And I had tried to explain to her numerous times before that's private area. You don't do it in public places. And gone over that with her, and it never seemed to faze her. And
Julie, how often would your daughter masturbate?
daily, constantly.
Do you have animals, Beth?
4 of them.
Can you tell me their names?
Clyde, Shuggy, Darcy, and Annie. And Daddy said a day ago that there was a stray cat who did not have a home, so Daddy was taking care of it and took it to the vet when he had his flight to go.
And what do you do to the animals, Beth?
Stick them with pins.
Do you stick them a little bit or a lot?
A lot.
What are you trying to do to the animals, Beth?
Kill them.
What do they do when you stick them with the pins?
Well, Annie cries. She's a dog.
She got baby birds down out of the nest, and we thought maybe she was just curious. So we explained that she could hurt them, put them back, and went through a whole sitting down and talking to her about the problem of it. And the next day we went out to check the baby birds, and they were on the ground dead with their necks broken.
Let's talk about what happened once when you were smaller, when you found some baby birds in a tree. What did you do then?
I took them out.
And what did Mom say to you?
That the mother will not come back if somebody touches her baby.
Are the baby birds kind of small? Can you describe them for me?
Well, they don't have their eyes open, but they can hear me, and they look up.
Are they kind of helpless? Little baby birds? Can they fly?
No.
Can they run away?
Yes.
They can? Are they easy to catch or hard to catch?
Hard.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to remember. With the baby birds, what did you do?
Took them out of the tree.
And what did you do with them?
Played around too rough. Also, when at the end, I picked it up and I thought it was Dad, and I came to say, Mommy, is this bird dead? And she said, she called Daddy and said, Tim, and Daddy came and I think I remember that they said yes.
Mm-hmm. And so did the little baby birds die?
I don't know.
You don't remember?
I just remember that I think I remember that Mommy and Daddy said the last bird we got was dead.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what Mom said to me? She said that all of them were dead. Did you squeeze them? Did Baby Beth squeeze them? You're doing a good job, honey. Go ahead and tell me what happened.
I squeezed them.
And what happened?
They died.
But this kind of aggression at our animals and even at our brother Jonathan was beginning to grow to such an excess that our life was miserable at home. John would cry in the mornings and say his stomach hurt. For the longest time, we thought maybe this child has some problem with his intestinal area, or maybe he has allergies, and so we tried to get all that checked out. Come to find out, Beth was coming out of her room and hitting him in the stomach. And so as a last resort, just to protect him, we had to tie our door shut. So I guess for the last 3 or 4 months now, we've had to tie her in at night, sort of barricade her.
The repercussions of Beth's tragic childhood led to uncontrollable rage. Despite the love and nurturing of her adoptive parents, she took this rage out on herself, on her brother, and on them. Her acts of violence became more and more cruel and frightening.
Well, I noticed several, like paring knives in the kitchen, missing. And my first thought was Beth. And I felt a little guilty about it at first. I thought, nah. But I really didn't even mention it to her. They had been gone several weeks. She was sitting at the table drawing and mentioned to me, what do those knives look like that are gone, Mom? And I said, what knives, Beth? And she said, weren't they kind of silver and about this big? And I knew then, and then this little smile that's not a sweet smile, but a malicious type of smile. And I knew then, I thought, she's got them.
Tell me about the knives. Where did you get them?
From the drawer.
And where else? Do you remember?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about it.
I got them from the dishwasher.
What kind of knives?
Big sharp ones.
And what do you want to do with those knives?
Kill John and Mommy with them, and Daddy.
And when Mommy asks you about where the knives are, what do you say?
I don't know where they are.
What did you think she might do with the knives?
My first thought was Jonathan.
And the reason we thought that was that by this time, she had tried to kill John on several occasions and openly admitted that.
In the basement, she was hitting his head against a cement floor. I heard his screams and ran down and had to literally pull her hands off, and she looked wild-eyed.
Did you get real mad at him? Did you hit his head real hard? Tell me about it. How many times did you do it? A lot? What was the floor like?
Cement.
And what happened to your brother? Tell me about it.
His head hurt real bad, but his chin, he had to have stitches in it.
Could you stop? Use your words, Beth.
No.
Okay. What was your brother doing when you were doing this?
Playing with the toys.
Okay. Was he asking you to stop when you were doing it? What was he saying?
He said, Beth, stop.
And what did you do?
I kept on hurting them.
What were you thinking when you were doing that?
Thinking of killing them.
How did you stop? What made you stop?
When I heard Peter walking across the kitchen,
Mm-hmm.
it made me stop because I thought Mommy and Daddy were coming.
Okay. Did Mommy come? What did she do?
She sent me to my room.
Okay. And what if Mom didn't stop you? What would you have done?
Kept on doing it.
And what about...
After evaluating the extent of Beth's psychological problems, Dr. McGidd felt that for the well-being of the family, Beth needed to be temporarily separated from them. In April of 1989, her parents brought her to a special home with an expert at raising children with early attachment disorders, especially children who are dangerous to themselves and others.
I have children that have killed numerous times. Cold-blooded family members, neighbor children, killed them. And they can do it. Makes my blood run cold just thinking about 9 years old. People don't think a 9-year-old is capable of cold-blooded murder, but they are. That attachment break does severe damage to the heart, the ability to care and the ability to love. If they don't care and they don't love, they're capable of anything. We're very strict about everything. Everything is completely monitored. We take complete control because a child who's unattached does not trust. And because they don't trust, they don't allow anybody to be boss of them. So we take complete control. They are not boss of anything. They have to ask to get a drink of water. They have to ask to go to the bathroom. They have to ask to leave our sight. Part of that is because we cannot trust them because of the damage that they've done before.
Beth, would you like to say grace, please?
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this good day and everybody doing good. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. They believe that they're evil. They believe they're from the devil. They believe that they are not a person of value. And we have to change that, and we have to build that from a child who's nothing, who's a bad kid in their own mind, to a child who's valuable and loving, and they see themselves as that.
You don't have to bite this.
When they do a chore well, we can say, you did a good job, you're a good worker. And then it just builds that self-esteem little by little so that they change the way that they see themselves.
Several months into treatment in this controlled environment, Beth had made progress, and her therapist decided to loosen some of the controls.
Anybody wants some more? I see that.
Beth continued to show signs of improvement. She began to develop a sense of right and wrong. She seemed to respond to affection, was more outgoing.
Gosh, you don't have to like.
She went to public school, made friends at the local church, and even sang in the choir.
In the beginning, we couldn't trust her with anything. She was locked up at night. We had alarms on the door at night, so she wasn't sneaking around doing things with the other children. We don't worry about that anymore. There's no alarm on her door at night now. She sleeps in the same room with my own daughter, and I trust her that much. She brushes the dogs, and I trust her that much. Because she has earned that trust. She's learned it. She has a heart, and she has a love inside, and she feels bad when she does something now. In the past, because she didn't have a conscience, she didn't feel anything when she did something bad. There was just no feeling there. And now she does feel bad, and it shows in her face. I believe that Beth can make it. She's got a really bright mind. She's got a good heart now, which has done a lot of healing. She's got a really super set of parents. They're powerful, they're knowledgeable, they're motivated. She's done a lot of good work with you in therapy, with Cannell and with myself. She wants to heal, and that's the number one key. And she wants to heal because she has a family that really cares about her, and she wants to be with them.
Do you know where that anger came from?
That's when my birth dad hurt me. I had it all inside, and I remembered it, and I started doing it.
And what did that do when it was inside?
it made me want to hurt people really bad.
And who did you hurt?
My brother, my mom and dad, and animals. And animals.
Who did it hurt the most?
My brother.
Who did it hurt the most?
Me.
Why don't you tell me that?
It hurt me the most.
How did it hurt you the most?
Because when I hurt other people, I'm burning my good self.
How do you feel right now, Beth?
Sad.
It's kind of tough to talk about, isn't it?
Yeah.
This episode was written by Misdemeanor. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters Premium. Bye for now.